and welcome to another episode on how to be a great player. Now, in this episode, I'm responding to a request of somebody who said, how do I come up with a good name? Now, before I continue, yes, I shaved. It's temporary. Don't panic. Don't worry. You can put the children away. It's safe to come out. It was because I was having a head cast made. Long story, one day I'll share it. But for now, 'tis me. Of course, we have a new look going on, and we'd love your feedback on what you think about that, and leave that in the comments below, of course. So, back to today's conversation. How to come up with a great name for your character. Well, like everything else that I talk about when coming up with things for your character, the name is perhaps one of the most important details that you can possibly hope to work with. So, what's in a name? Well, quite frankly, your name needs to be used as a very quick way of inspiring the rest of your players sitting around the table to think about your character in a certain way. Now, most of us, when we were born, didn't have a choice over what we were called. We were just popped out and said, oh, you're a Bobby, you're a Angelique, you're a Kurt, you're a Brown, whatever the case might be. Our characters do, however, have a choice. So we need to start at the ground roots, and of course these you can mix around in terms of which order you apply, but this is the sequence that I normally use when coming up with a name. Firstly, I try and describe the personality of the character that I'm playing, because oftentimes in my head I get this vision of this noble warrior all dressed in plate mail, or of this wizened old man with staff and sigils all over a flowing robe standing in the wind, whatever the case might be. So then I try and come up with a name that describes that image in my head, so that every time my fellow players have to call me by name, they're conjuring up the same kind of imagery in their head to help make the game that much more immersive. So you can have names that are strong, you can have names that are weak, names that are timid, names that are aggressive, you can have names that are gentle, and you can have names that are whimsical. What are those kind of names? Well, in your native language, those might be different, but in English, for example, George was once considered a fairly strong name, and now might not be considered such a strong name. If you're a George, you maybe are a reliable person. John is a strong name. Quite short, quite compact little name. James is more of a aggressive name? Timid name? I don't know. I'm using real-world examples because you're going to see a little bit later on what we do to those real-world names to make them sound fantastical or from the future. So if you say Anne, you might think that Anne is either a strong name or an aggressive name. It's quite a hard letter, Anne. You can say it softly, Anne, but you have to hold yourself back. Whereas, say, Lucy is pretty tricky to make aggressive. Lucy! That's more angry than aggressive, but, well, maybe they're the same thing. So the point is that you need to try and find, in my opinion, a real-world name that fits the best to the type of character. So instead of Gandalf, you go, well, Gary. Gary is, to me, a weird kind of name. Gary the Grey. Well, maybe that could work. Or maybe he was a Garrick. Or perhaps he was a Greg or a Graham. I think Graham is closer to Gandalf than Gary. So let's say we have Graham, the White Wizard, or the Grey Wizard as he was when he first started, wasn't he? Anyway, so we have Graham. We're sticking with Graham. We like Graham. Graham is good. Now, my favorite part, vowel swap. We swap the vowels around and we drop out the A and the A, and we replace them with different vowels. So maybe Graham becomes Greom. Maybe Greom, does that still have the same tonality as Graham? Or maybe it should be Gream. Gream could work. Gream is not too bad. And that's certainly not sounding much like Graham. I am Gream of gold. Graham works. Let's stick with Graham. So vowel swapping allows you to literally take a real world name and make it your own. Okay, so vowel swapping. Then you functionalize it. Now, in the old days, a lot of us, our surnames had some kind of meaning. So if you were perhaps known as John Fletcher, or now with Valswapping, Gin Fletcher. Fletcher was the craft of making arrows, so that was what you did. Or baker, or cartwright, or cobbler, or shit stirrer, whatever the case might be. Whatever your function was, that kind of became your surname. Or in the case of the Germans and the Dutch, it was where you were from. Gering van Ausdach, you are from Ausdach, whatever the case might be. So functionalize your name depending on the time period that you're in. If you're in a fantasy world, there's nothing wrong with being Graham of Ghent, or Graham from the little town of Chotney-on-Rye, or whatever the case might be. Functionalizing also helps to create a sense that the character is not just something that's been scribbled on the page. So Graham of Ghent, now he has a history. He was in Ghent. Why did he leave Ghent? Why doesn't he go back to Ghent? Does he have people in Ghent? I don't know. So many questions I have to ask them because I really like Graham and his character. And perhaps Ghent's a pretty place. Who knows? So you functionalize it. It could be Gin Knight, in which case Knight you can then swap some vowels around and you get Nocht, or Nacht, or Nucht, whatever the case might be. You get the idea though. You could also put in the words fierce, bold, strong, weak, timid. Drop out the vowels and suddenly it's Tomed. So Graham Tomed. However you choose to play it. So now we've functionalized it. Now what we're going to do is racialize it. Oh, big word there. By racialize, I mean if you're playing an elf, well, perhaps you're not going to have a very aggressive name, because the elves traditionally didn't go for aggressive names. So Jin, which is still fairly strong, like John, maybe you need to drop out the N at the end and maybe add an I, so it's GI. That wasn't so hard, it's still a base of John, but now it's GI, or Geo, however you want to do it. If it's a dwarf, perhaps it needs to have more guttural sounds in it. So instead of it being J-I-H-N or Graham, maybe it's Greach. Just replace the M with an Ach, because, well, dwarves are either Scottish or German, so it's an Ach, whether you're Dwarvish Scottish or Dwarvish German. It is the same thing. We add an Ach at the end, and it is German or Scottish, depending on where you happen to be and what your dwarf is all about. So we racialize. We try and figure out how we can turn it into something that sounds a little bit more like the race, because no one wants to encounter an elf named, "Hi, I am the elf named Brian." Well, perhaps once or twice, because then you say, "Oh, you must have been raised by humans." No, my parents just like that human name. Oh, well, that's all right, but I don't really want to know more. Graham of Ghent, or Greach of Tolbrenach, now I want to know about Greach, or Graham, or whatever the race he happens to be. So we racialize it. Now we try and give it a history and a meaning. So if your name is Graham of Ghent, all those questions that popped up. Ghent, where is Ghent? Why did he leave? Is there something more to it? If he is Greach of Tollendor, is Tollendor a famous city? Is Tollendor perhaps an estate that's got a lot of history attached to it because it's the home of assassins? You need to come up with the history behind your name. If I look at my name, there's 3 pieces of history there. There's my first name, Guy, which was a result of family members wanting everyone in my generation to have the letter Y in their first name. My second name is Campbell, which is to honor an alliance between my ancestors from Sweden and Norway and my ancestors from Scotland, the Campbells. So every firstborn male in my family has had the name Campbell for the last 400 years or whatever it is. And then my surname is a bizarre German Scottish bastardization of a Danish surname, which is lost in history. So there's a lot to it, so you can add to it. Then finally, you need to check it with your GM. You might say, right, my name is Graham of Ghent, and the GM goes, you know, Graham, it's an okay name, but all of the males of the race that you're playing all Tiefling males or all Klingon males at this time period in the world, or all Predator aliens at this time, they don't use the letter G, they use the letter K. So now he's Creum, which might work, but Creum of Ghent, well, who knows? So work with your GM once you've come up with a name, and don't try and aggressively force him to accept it. Just go with it. And then finally, you need to work out how to bring this all into your character's history. How do you tie all of these things in so that your players with you go, wow, Graham of Ghent, there's so much history there. How did you come up with all this stuff? And you go, well, I watched some great videos and dropped some vowels and, well, the rest just filled itself in. Anyway, I hope this answers your question on how to come up with a great name for your character, and if it did, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button, and if you want to request specific videos, leave us a comment below. And until next time, happy playing.